Detective Inspector Alastair Finch, a man whose tweed suit seemed permanently creased and whose spectacles perched precariously on his nose, surveyed the scene. The victim, Mr. Bartholomew Blackwood, a renowned culinary critic, lay sprawled on the Persian rug, a cast-iron skillet resting beside him. The air in the opulent dining room was thick with the aroma of burnt garlic and fear. "A rather messy end," Finch murmured, adjusting his spectacles. Constable Davies, young and eager, scribbled furiously in his notebook. "Looks like he was bludgeoned, sir. Clean hit, judging by the indentation," Davies stammered, pointing to a slight dent in the expensive hardwood floor beneath the skillet. Finch knelt, examining the skillet. Indeed, a cast-iron skillet. A rather unusual murder weapon, wouldn't you say, Davies? The room was filled with potential suspects. Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood, the widow, stood by the fireplace, a picture of grief, though Finch noted a certain coolness in her demeanor. Then there was Mr. Edgar Thornton, Blackwood's disgruntled business partner, his face a mask of barely concealed resentment. And finally, Miss Penelope Plum, the Blackwoods' young and nervous maid, who kept wringing her hands. Finch began his interviews. Mrs. Blackwood claimed she was in the library when she heard a crash. She rushed in to find her husband like this. Thornton admitted to having a heated argument with Blackwood earlier that day, something about a scathing review that had cost him a fortune. Miss Plum, her voice trembling, said she was cleaning upstairs and didn't see or hear anything. "They all have motives," Davies whispered to Finch. "But no one seems to have a solid alibi." Finch stroked his chin. "That's where you're wrong, Davies. They all have alibis. 2 perfect alibis." He picked up the cast-iron skillet. It was heavy, as expected. He noticed a small, almost imperceptible scratch on the bottom. He turned it over. Nothing. He looked closer at the scratch. It wasn't a scratch. It was a tiny letter. A P. Finch's mind raced. Miss Penelope Plum. Could she be the killer? It seemed unlikely. She was timid, nervous. But the P, it was too much to ignore. He called Miss Plum back into the dining room. "Miss Plum," he began, his voice gentle, "you said you were cleaning upstairs. Did you, by any chance, use a cast-iron skillet today?" Plum's eyes widened. "Yes, sir. I was cleaning the grease from the breakfast skillet. It was rather stubborn." "And where did you clean it?" "In the scullery, sir." Finch smiled. "And the skillet you used, was it this one?" He gestured to the skillet on the floor. Plum looked at the skillet, her face paling. "Yes, sir. That's the one." Finch picked up the skillet and pointed to the P on the bottom. "Miss Plum, can you explain this?" Plum burst into tears. I didn't mean to, sir. Mr. Blackwood, he was always criticizing my cooking. He said my omelets were an insult to eggs. He threatened to have me fired." She sobbed uncontrollably. "I was cleaning the skillet, and he came in. He started shouting at me again. He grabbed the skillet, and we struggled. It was an accident." Finch listened patiently. "So, the accident happened in the scullery?" "Yes, sir. But Mr. Blackwood's body was found here, in the dining room." Plum's sobs subsided slightly. I panicked, sir. I didn't know what to do. I dragged him in here. I thought if it looked like a robbery, they wouldn't suspect me." Finch sighed. It was a clumsy attempt at a cover-up. "Miss Plum," he said, "you've made a grave mistake. But telling the truth is the first step to redemption. He turned to Davies. "Constable, please take Miss Plum's statement, and someone clean up this mess. And get Mrs. Blackwood and Mr. Thornton. I believe we have some explaining to do." As Davies led a distraught Miss Plum away, Finch looked around the opulent dining room. The aroma of burnt garlic still hung heavy in the air. He picked up the cast iron skillet, the pea gleaming faintly in the light. The cast iron alibi. It had almost worked. Almost. But in the end, the truth, like the stubborn grease on the skillet, always found a way to surface. Even the most carefully crafted alibi could be undone by a single small letter.